Hello and welcome to the fifth section of our course, Redux CRUD Administration. In this section, we'll be building an interface to create new customer records. We'll begin by exposing a new endpoint on our API that allows clients to create new customer records. Then we'll move to the client and use Redux Form to build our new customer form with validation. Finally, we'll implement some back-end model validations and incorporate those into the UI as well. In today's video, we'll be writing all the backend code that we need in order to create users. In our most recent videos, we got our client application set up with routing and completed our authentication scheme by adding a logout flow. Today we'll begin with some data model changes so that we have all of our necessary tables and relationships between them. We'll then build a new API endpoint for creating users and test drive it using Insomnia. Let's start with our data model changes. Recall that earlier on in this course we created an invoices table with a total and an email address and a foreign key to the users table. But it would be better if users could create invoices that reference real customer records. Since our app is not yet in production, the easiest way to rearrange our tables is to rewrite existing migrations. So I'll change this invoices migration to create the customers table instead, and then we'll build a new migration to create the invoices table. Most of this one will be the same as it is now. I just need to change the table name and remove the total column. Let's also make our user ID not nullable. And we'll also use cascade deletion on the user ID foreign key so that the customers will be removed if the user gets deleted. Now we'll just need to rename the file. Now let's create our invoices table. We create the migration file with the make command and open it up for editing. So we'll give our invoices a total column and a customer ID so that users can bill their customers. We'll add the cascade deletion to this one as well, so that the invoices will get deleted along with the customers, and we'll also add a timestamp to keep track of when our invoices are created. Now before we rebuild our database, let's adjust our seeds. First, we run the seed make task. Now let's copy our old invoices seed code into the new file and make some small adjustments. Similar to migration updates, we change the table name and we remove the total field. Now for the invoices, we'll just add a couple for the first customer. Then we'll get rid of the email address since it no longer belongs in this table. So now we should be able to rebuild our database. First, we'll drop it and recreate it. Then we'll run the migrations and the seeds. The data model is now fixed, so we can start writing the backend code to create customers. The first step in this process is a model. This is just a standard bookshelf model like the others that we already have. The next step is to create the endpoint. I'll make a folder called controllers where we'll define files to group together related endpoints. So this will be my customer's controller, and we'll need to import the customer model and then export a function that'll attach the endpoints to an express router. To create a customer, we'll do an HTTP post to /customers. This will expect the customer attributes to be contained in a customer property of the request body. The attributes get passed into the forge method, which builds a new customer object. After we save it, we'll write the newly created record to the response JSON. Now we need to initialize our controller with the API routes. To do that, I'll just import my controller function and call it with my API routes object. We're ready to test the API, but first I want to make one more small change. Insomnia doesn't make the handling of the CSRF tokens quite as easy as Axios does, so I want to turn it off. It's probably safe to only have it running on production anyway, so I'll check the node env flag before deciding whether to use the middleware that checks my CSRF token. So now let's give this a spin. First, let's make sure that we're authenticated. Now I'll submit an email address and a user ID to our new endpoint. On the right, it seems that my new customer was created. However, we should also see what happens if we pass invalid data. For example, the email address is non-nullable, so what happens if I remove that field? Notice the request is spinning endlessly. Let's see what the console says behind this. What we see here is our constraint violation error printed as part of an unhandled promise rejection. This occurred because connects and bookshelf operations are promise-based, and when exceptions like this constraint violation are thrown during a promise handler, the promise fails and we're making no effort to handle these failed promises. We're going to handle these errors much more gracefully later, but for now, the least we can do is catch the error and return a 422 in the response. So I'll add a catch handler to this save promise, and we'll write a 422 to the response. Now let's try submitting a bad request again. Now instead of hanging and spinning forever, I get an error code that at least clues me in that I did something wrong. That's all the time that we have for this lesson. Today we learned how to create records in Bookshelf and exposed a route to create a new customer.